Hello, this is Luciana Paulise. Today I will be interviewing Alyssa Filter with the company Clari, which do sales forecasting, and she will be sharing some wartime advice, how to lead the company through crisis. All right, Alyssa, thank you very much for joining us today. So please tell me more about you, about your company.
Sure. So my name's Alyssa Filter, and I am the CFO of a company called Clari. So Clari is an AI-based revenue operations platform.
Mhm.
And so it provides real-time insights into every deal, predictive pipeline analytics, and continuously rolled up forecasts. And one of the things I love about working at Clari is I'm a pretty heavy user of the product myself. And so as a CFO, I'm always looking for different ways to validate the forecast and do that in a data-driven way. And Clari provides multiple pieces of that data-driven validation process that I go through.
Wow. So how is AI working on that? Because right now with COVID, we're all asking the same questions. How do we get customers? How can we predict sales? Everything seems so unpredictable. So how is AI helping you to achieve that?
So Clari automatically gathers data and insights from all of the sales and marketing systems, as well as things like email and calendar at a deal by deal level. So we take historical trends from prior 2 years and then apply the AI to that to provide a single source of truth for forecasting. So in the case of COVID, for example, one of the things that we did within Clari was to apply a lens across all of our potential customers and whether the companies and the industries that they were in may have had been affected by COVID and the sense of a headwind or a tailwind. And we use that to influence our what we call a CRM score or likelihood to convert those deals. And so as we went through the COVID period, that AI continued to refine based on the trending of how those deals were performing over time through the funnel.
Oh, wow. hmm So I can imagine that you're one of the companies that are doing well during COVID. You're the lucky ones.
Thankfully, yes.
Great. So how are you? So the other question is, whenever your company, well, first is doing well or is not doing well during COVID, right? But then if it's doing well, how are you managing through crisis? How are you dealing with your employees? Are they working from home or not? Can you tell me more about that, Alyssa?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So yes, currently our employees are working from home.
How many
So
employees?
we're about 300.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So we started work from home right away when the shelter in place order started we're primarily based in California, though we have 2 international subsidiaries and employees dispersed throughout the United States as well. So we went, those HQ based employees, we started work from home in mid-March, and thankfully, much of our businesses run using SaaS products similar to ourselves. And so we were able to really leverage technology and hardly miss a beat as we went into shelter in place. And so we continued to leverage our own platform to help keep our go-to-market activities strong and on track. But yeah, so it's coming on 6 months. We probably won't be back in the office. We've told our employees, similar to the approach that companies like Google are taking, that we won't be back fully in the office. We won't ask employees to be back in the office until next summer, but we'll probably do a phased approach for people who want to come back to the office, starting sometime in the new year. Hopefully by then we'll have a vaccine underway.
Yeah, hopefully. So how do you keep your employees engaged during these times?
Yeah, a lot of different ways. So first of all, I think as a company, and particularly our HR organization, has had to get really creative about the ways that we engage our employees. So one thing that I think Clari does very well is our leadership team, and particularly our CEO, are very transparent and great with communication. And so from the beginning, we always had, even pre-COVID, we had a cadence of having all hands meetings, typically about every other week. But when we went into remote mode, we determined that it was even more important to be in constant communication and have that visibility with our employees. And so we implemented weekly town halls in which our CEO and other executives at the company, and then we even extended it beyond that to some of our board members as well, we're really interacting with our employees on a weekly basis, giving them updates on things that we were seeing in the economy, or things that we were hearing from our peers and our investors. And so just really high touch points with our employees. And so I think that helped a lot, that we didn't just retreat into our offices and get to work. We were really still proactive with our communication. And I think another thing that's really important in this sort of environment is transparency. So as we were going through updating our planning process and rethinking our company's strategy for the year, and as things were evolving, we were continuing to keep our employees up to date on what that process was looking like. And then we're also always continuing to think about what fun things can we do to keep our employees engaged and part of the company, where, you know, we used to do more in-person things, celebrations and the like. We're transitioning those to remote mode. We've been doing a lot of mindfulness activities remotely, for example, and facilitating those sorts of online activities with the team. Things, we've even done some really fun fitness courses, and just trying to get really creative ways for our employees to stay engaged while they're all at home.
Right. And have you delivered any specific training to the leaders to be able, because I think that in the middle of this, you have, you know, several, you have the employees, you have the board, you have the leaders, how you train the leaders to communicate with the employees in a different way, right? It's how, you know, I think they need some guidance, but every company is doing a different way.
Absolutely. So this is one of the things we did right out the gate when we worked from home, is we came up with guides for our managers. Talking about things like one-on-ones are more important than ever, how to ask questions to make sure employees feel like they have a safe space to talk about how they're handling all of the current environment, et cetera. So we, number one, we have a leadership program for all of our people managers. And so we leverage that platform, where we were already doing ongoing training for our leadership team on various topics. But very early on, we created a kind of a management layer training course on how to be best in class remote people managers. And this was something, interestingly, that was already in flight for us, that we just spent some time honing in and finalizing. But because we have employees all over the United States already, we had a focus on how to be a really strong remote manager and how to manage remote teams. And so we packaged up resources, we did a training session, and we posted all of these on, we have a leadership Slack channel, as well as an internal resource wiki page to arm our people managers with different techniques on how to engage their employees. And then just from a company-wide perspective as well, that tips and tricks on best ways to leverage technology to communicate.
Right. And how are you doing with the board? You are the CFO. I imagine you're working really hard with the CEO and the board, right? How is this changing during these times?
Yeah, so I would say from the very beginning, as we started to get a sense that the world was changing rapidly, we started to be in a much more high volume cadence with our board. So from very early on, we engaged our board in a big way and really leaned on them to tell us what they were seeing across all of their companies, because since they have such a wider lens than we do on what are other companies doing? What are they experiencing? And so we leaned on them very heavily, particularly in the beginning, as things were changing every single day, the sentiment of what's going to happen with our companies, how long will this last, those sorts of things. And so I would say the frequency of communication was very high touch, particularly in the beginning. Then I would say we went back to more of a normal cadence for a period of time. Now a lot of companies have either a January or February start of their next fiscal year. And so many of us as CFOs are getting geared up to go into really heavy planning for next fiscal. And so all of those conversations are starting to pick up for me in particular, again, with the board. And it's about setting proper expectations. So here's what we're thinking about from a planning perspective for next year. Does that align with what you're seeing with other companies? Does that align with what we're seeing with macro trends? And so we're really increasing the volume of communication as we're thinking about our planning for next fiscal, so that we get early buy-in, early feedback on that planning process, so we can ensure that we have a solid financial plan for next year.
All right. So, are you able to share any of those macro trends? Anything that can help other companies, maybe smaller that or don't have a board, or that what can you say about the future?
Sure. I think a lot of it is just talking about and diving deeper into things that you can see that are public knowledge. Like, not a lot of investor secrets, I guess. But I think in general, the sentiment that I'm hearing when I'm talking to other CFOs is most CFOs are feeling like the worst of this is over. Very hopeful for the coming months. I think we've also seen a pretty big uptick in IPO velocity. So we saw the likes of Snowflake and Sumo just recently, and all of those.
It's like starting again, right?
That's right. That's right. The velocity of the IPOs is picking up, which I think is a really great signal. And so we're thinking about that in the context of all of this, and really what the sentiment is for technology companies. I think we've all kind of seen the stock market results. That's been really hard to digest. Like, what's the framework and what's the causation of the way that the stock market's behaving? But I think in general for technology companies, what we saw from that is that there's still a really strong demand and really great market opportunity for technology companies. And we saw that the market rewarded that during this very uncertain period. And then I think just another thing that I'm hearing, and also on the news, but getting a lot of corroboration from investors and other folks that we're talking to, is there's just a lot of optimism that we will have a vaccine in a somewhat shortened
future
what we would have thought. And so I think companies are feeling a lot more optimistic that we'll be able to increase things like travel, that perhaps next year we may be able to return to some sort of in-person events, which is really important for a lot of companies to drive pipeline. So I think the sentiment and confidence of a stronger next calendar year is increasing, and folks are working on their operating plans as such.
So what I hear is that you still think the stock market is not gonna plumb down. Like some people were saying, no, we're not. No, in the worst part now, it's going down terribly, and it's never happening. Like I thought it was gonna happen in July, then August, and now we're already in September, and nothing's going on.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, all industries have been impacted disproportionately, right? So if you're in travel or hospitality, most certainly those industries have not yet rebounded. But for a lot of call it business optimization products, or B2B companies in particular, that I think that there's been a lot of success there, and certainly not the doomsday outcome that many of us feared. And so I think, yes, there's definitely a positive lens looking into next year in particular.
Wonderful. And what are your recommendations? Is there anything because I don't know if you would agree with me, like a wartime, right? That things are weird. It's really hard to get customers. I mean, the spending is low. So, what are you recommending that that companies can do, especially CFOs?
Yeah, I think it's just for the one thing I've leaned on is a dynamic planning process. So, more so than ever, we've planned for a very wide range of outcomes at the company and then assess risk against each one of those outcomes. So, we didn't always go and have a very doomsday plan. What's the worst case scenario look like? Particularly since we've had a healthy balance sheet with fundraising earlier. But in this current environment, our planning has been very dynamic and planning for a very wide range of outcomes so that we were never caught flat-footed, being behind by not having a plan for all of those different possibilities of outcomes. And so I think that's continued. So while the sentiment is increasing, while there's a lot more optimism, I think still ensuring that you have a backup plan, that you're planning for all different scenarios, is really important in what you described as wartime. I think the other really important piece is revisiting your company strategy and ensuring that you still have a strong North Star. And so what I mean by that is going back and saying, hey, if your goal was to double in revenue this year and that was going to support your operations for next year and you didn't hit those goals, how would you realign your goals for next year? How would you shift your spend in accordance with whatever your new defined company strategy is? And so I think as the world continues to evolve and we're starting to see more changes for positive outlook for the economy, it's how do you think about what your the way that you define your company strategy and then making sure all of your key inputs to your model are aligned against that. So I think the last piece that I would say about planning and thinking about wartime management is thinking about both qualitative and quantitative factors. I think one thing that gets lost in the planning process at times is your non-financial indicators. So making sure that you have a pulse on things like customer NPS, but also employee sat. So are you really measuring how your employee sentiment is? One of the worst things that could happen to a company is a dramatic change in employee retention. So are you thinking about how to make sure that you're retaining and rewarding your key folks so that you are set up for success, particularly as the environment changes? And so that's an area that we've been spending a lot of time, is how do we make sure that we're well placed to have happy employees who want to stay with us for the long term, and that we're doing everything we can as an employer. So there's a lot of different factors that aren't necessarily part of the financial model that should go into your planning process as well.
Right, right. Employees are key nowadays, especially in a company like yours, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Hmm. So, is AI helping you also on the financial and planning side?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're leveraging our platform right now as we're looking at so one big component of the AI is conversion rates through the funnel. And so we're leveraging the platform and the AI right now to understand how our conversion rates on our pipeline are evolving. And we're leveraging that to back into what our marketing spend needs to look like next year so that we can achieve our pipeline targets, for example, and what we think is possible from a top line bookings perspective. So we're using all of the outputs from the AI engine in the product currently to drive our next fiscal year planning.
Oh, that's super interesting. And so, how are your employees organized? You mentioned that you're working on engaging them, on keeping the good resources, and some companies were more successful when they were working with self-organized teams, that they were more independent. Other companies are still keeping the traditional way of working. So how are you using any agile methods, or like a Scrum, or do you have any strategies in the way you manage your employees?
So far, we haven't made a dynamic change or a dramatic change to the way that our employees are organized and the way that we're managing the company. Like I said, we were pretty lucky to kind of seamlessly transition into the current working environment. So we've kept it fairly business as usual in the way that our teams are structured and organized. That said, just a much higher focus on communication. So
Right.
making sure that we're able to seamlessly transition information across all of our different teams in a
Mhm.
productive way has become a key area for us to focus on. And then I guess the other thing I would say on employee productivity and our team organization is Zoom fatigue is real. I think everybody across all companies have figured that out. And so we're still working on managing different ways to give our people breaks from the Zoom meetings and make sure that we're making sure that people are able to stay engaged and productive in what can be kind of an overwhelming working style.
Right. Well, I think that communication is key, as you were saying, coaching. And any recommendations on retention during these days? Because now that the economy is, I mean, if it goes up again, maybe there will be some changes. Employees going from one company to the other. So
Mhm.
any strategies on that? Any recommendations?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different strategies. First of all, I think there's been a lot of articles published recently that companies who had either previously done salary reductions for
Mhm.
folks or done furloughs or the like are
Right.
pulling those back. And so, where there may have been changes to employee compensation as a result of this, I think largely companies are moving forward. So, whether it be they had rolled out a reduction in salary or they had postponed a salary review, for example. If basically what I'm hearing and seeing is that those are being put back in place. So I think there's going to have to be a focus on compensation to be competitive. That said, I think
Mhm.
companies are still trying to understand how the remote working environment, particularly if people have moved to other states or other areas, what the impact of that is on employee compensation. But I would say the other key factor in employee retention outside of something like compensation is flexibility. And so I think as employers, we've all had to think about how do we provide the most flexible work environment that we can for our employees. We're all experiencing really unique challenges. So, for example, people that have young children who have not yet been able to go back to school, how can we support those people in the best possible way? And I think when you really think at the core and you have empathy for your employees and try to understand what challenges that they're going through and how you can help support those at a corporate level, it buys a lot of goodwill because your employees know that you care about them as humans. You want to support them to make sure that their current environment supports whatever they may be experiencing at home. I think that's another key to employee satisfaction and retention is just truly caring about how to support them in whatever they may be going through as an individual in this current time.
Right. And the other piece that is also very difficult while you're working remotely is performance. Many companies are wondering, how do we track performance? How do we evaluate the employees when we're not able to see them actually,
Mhm.
the 9 hours or the 8 hours? So how's Clary doing that?
Well, I'll say I don't think Clary's ever been a company that has focused on things like number of hours worked as an output for performance. And so I would say we've always had a really good lens on work product and not not how the work gets done, but that the work gets done and the quality of the work that was
Mhm.
performed. And so I think number one, it's really important to keep the communication cadence. I mentioned earlier the importance is now more important than ever to keep one-on-ones, make sure that you're having all that regular cadence with your employees. An important part of the performance measurement of that is ensuring that you have set and measurable goals. And so while previously you may have been in person and been more informal about the way that you set projects, communicate goals, I think it's really critical in the current times to be very deliberate about
Mhm.
the way that you communicate goals and how those are being achieved. And then I think you can use that to help with performance measurement. But it's getting a lot more structured and formal about
Mhm.
goal setting and then measuring attainment against them.
Right, right. Do you use a specific tool for that? Like a software?
We do. We use a tool called Reflective,
Mhm.
and that's where we capture our quarterly KPIs,
Mhm.
both from top level, executive level, all the way down to our individual contributors. And so we
Right.
roll up all of our KPIs using that tool.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alyssa. I think this was very useful information. Is there anything else that you would like to share that maybe I didn't ask about that, or what's your final message to the CFOs and the other companies that are trying to go back to the new normal?
Sure. I think the most important thing that I could share to finance leaders is to remember to be a business leader first and a finance leader second. And what I mean by that is, as the CFO, you have insights across the entire organization because of the nature of the role. And so it's really important that you're leveraging all those insights that you have cross-functionally, that you're helping bring all of your teams together. That anything that you're seeing as you're reviewing your financial results, that you're distributing information across the teams, and that you're partnering as best you can to ensure that you're setting yourself up for success. And so I think it's really critical as we go into next year planning to really think about business leadership, not just financial leadership, and how that impacts your relationships across the teams, as well as the planning process going forward.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much, Alyssa. It was again great information to share. And well, that's it on my side. This was Luciana Paulise. Thank you very much, Alyssa.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye.